Hi everyone and welcome to this Christmas lettering tutorial for Procreate. I have been wanting to make this video for a while now as a thank you for all of your support this year. It's been a crazy year, but I am so grateful for every one of you who has bought any of my lettering courses or Procreate brushes or simply supported this channel by watching my videos. So this video actually includes a free Christmas lettering toolkit. I have included the link in the description of this video so you can go ahead and download your free toolkit, which includes 12 Procreate brushes, a color palette, and a template that you can use to create your artwork in Procreate. So make sure you download your toolkit before you start this tutorial, and let's get into it. Alright, so let's begin the tutorial. The first thing we're going to do is create a new canvas. I'm going to make my canvas 3000 by 3000 pixels. Make sure you're working at 300 dpi, and I'm going to change the background to the cream color from the color palette. And here I'm going to insert the template I've given you guys. So I've just saved it into my files and it should look like this. Now I want to give this letter a 3D effect, but I don't want it to be just straight and flat, so I'm just going to rotate it to the side. So when you select your object, make sure you deactivate the magnetics and snapping so that you can really choose the perfect angle. I'm going to make it slightly smaller. I'm going to distort it slightly just to give it a more realistic 3D effect. I'm just going to move this node here. I'll do that again so you can see. Make sure you're on the distort option. Now I'm going to recolor this layer and make it a dark green from the color palette. And within my layers, I'm going to rename this letter P template. I'm going to create a dimensional effect, so I'm just going to duplicate the layer and change the color of the top layer and make it a light green. I'm going to duplicate the layer once again, so I have 3 now, and I'm going to move the layer down, but I'm going to activate the snapping option and just move that second layer down, something like this. And you should have 2 shapes now, so I'm just going to merge them together. And I'm just going to fill in the shape. Now, you've probably guessed it, I'm just going to connect the edges together. Using the toolkit I have given you, you can use the vector pen and just draw a straight line to connect the edges of your shape. Now you should have something that looks like this. Let's go ahead and rename that dimensional effect. Now what we're going to do is create the inside of that shape, make it look like it's an empty letter. So I'm going to select the first layer, the letter P, and with the selection tool set to automatic, I am going to tap in the inside. That should select the inside of that template. Then I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to fill this selection with the pink. Now all we have to do is select that inside. Let's rename it so we know what we're talking about. So I'm going to select it and just move it down slightly. Now I'm going to reposition that inside so it's underneath the template. And you can see it's kind of going outside, so I'm just going to grab my eraser and use the vector pen to simply erase anything that's going outside of that template. Now it does already look like it's an empty 3D letter, but it does need a little bit of fixing over there, so I'm going to grab my eraser again and just connect the angle so it's perfectly straight. And you might notice that when we've done our selection with the automatic selection tool, the selection is not perfectly clear, so it will end up a little bit blurry. So I just like to go ahead and refine that shape. It's very subtle, you might not be able to see it on camera, but feel free to just clean up the edges of your shape to make sure it's not pixelated. And here we need to connect the shape as well. So using my eraser, I'm just drawing a line, holding the line so that it goes straight. And here, if I want to add more pink, I need to grab my brush, make sure I'm using pink, and just fix that little corner here. Okay, so we should have 3 shapes now. So we have the shape for the template, the shape for the inside, and the dimensional effect. So now we're ready to add some shadows and highlights. And the first shadow I'm going to add is the cast shadow behind the P. To do that, I'm just going to select that 3D effect, and I'm going to duplicate it, select the one at the bottom, change the blending mode to multiply, lower the opacity slightly. I can always readjust that later. And I'm just going to move it somewhere around here. I'm just going to grab my vector pen using the dark green, and I'm just going to connect the edges. So it's a straight line once again. Otherwise, it will look a little bit disconnected from the shape. This doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to blur that shadow. And now I'm going to add just a little bit of motion blur in the adjustments. And I might add a little bit of Gaussian blur as well on top of that, just to really make it super smooth. And I might just lower the opacity down again, maybe to about 40%. Now, I still think it needs a little bit more shadow on the edges here, because it does look a little bit too light over there and doesn't look super realistic. So I'm going to create a new layer just above that shadow, change the blending mode to multiply, and this time I'm going to grab the shading brush, still using the dark green, and I'm just going to focus on the edges of that shape. Might lower the opacity a bit so it's not too prominent, and I'm just going to, like I said, focus on the edges and kind of deepen that shadow just where the shape is. Feel free to make it a bit more gradual so you can lower the opacity of your brush and kind of blend the edges like that. Okay, so it already looks a little bit more realistic. The next thing we're going to do is add some highlights on the dimensional effect on the P. So I'm going to select that layer, which is my 3D effect layer, create a new layer on top, tap on the layer to make it a clipping mask. I'm going to grab a light green, and using the shading brush, I'm simply going to imagine the light is coming from the top right corner in the opposite direction of my shadow, obviously. So I'm just going to kind of focus on this part, so the right hand side, and create like a gradient. I'm not using the full opacity of this brush, so feel free to adjust and see what works better. And add a bit of highlight on this side. And you can see it's adding a highlight here and here as well. It might be a bit difficult to see on camera, but it's kind of going over. So what I'm going to do is just grab my eraser and erase that, because I don't need this area to have any highlight. gonna add a bit of reflection here. I need to add some light here as well, a little bit, but then I'm going to just erase this part so it creates like a nice corner. A little bit more here as well. I'm gonna do the same here and erase this part again to create a sharp corner, and same thing here. And you might notice that if you do that and you then erase, it's going to erase this part as well. So what you can do is just work on a separate layer. So create a new clipping mask and add your highlight however you want, and then erase the part you don't need without erasing this shape over here, and then you can just merge them together. So I'm going to do that here as well. And I might add just a tiny bit of reflection over there. And I actually need to erase this part first, so let's just go back. This part is not going to have any highlight, it's going to be in the shade, so I only just want this part to have a bit of light. That's much better. Okay, let's keep working on that dimensional effect. I'm just going to add a bit more shadow on some of these areas that didn't have any highlights. So I'm going to create a new layer above that 3D effect, but right underneath those highlights. So kind of in between, and create like a sandwich. I'm going to change the blending mode to multiply. And this time I'm going to use the dark green, so the same color as the main shape. And still using the shading brush, I'm just going to kind of focus on those little corners here and make them really dark. So it's all about creating contrast. And again, if you want, you can use your eraser to erase any part where there is no shadow and there is just highlights. Now, I had planned to have a darker background for this shape, so kind of like having the background the same color as my shape, just to make it stand out and have the elements in the center really pop. So I'm going to do that now and just change that beige color that we use and make it a dark green. So I want to add another layer of highlight just to create even more contrast. So just above that light green that we added, I'm going to create a new clipping mask. And this time I'm going to use that light beige color. I'm just going to emphasize this area. Again, I need to erase this little corner over there. And that's just, again, creating even more of a highlight. Make sure you erase anything that's going outside of your shape. Great. Now let's move on to the center of the shape. I wanted to create like a peppermint candy look. I thought, okay, maybe I'm gonna give you a brush and you can just stamp it, but I thought it would be way more fun if we create this shape together and you can adjust it to your need and change it if you want to. So what we're going to do is go back into our gallery and we're going to create a new canvas where we can just work on that shape. I'm going to make my new canvas the same size again, so 3000 by 3000 pixels. I'm going to go into my canvas option and activate my drawing guide and edit drawing guides, and I'm going to go into my symmetry, click options. Here I want to select radial and click done. And using a red brush, so we can use the red because I know I'm going to be using this color, but you can use any color here, it doesn't really matter. And using the vector pen, we're just going to draw our peppermint shape. I have literally just drawn a line and connected it to the center, so I kind of started outside of my canvas and draw a straight line by holding my pencil on my canvas and just waiting until it becomes perfectly straight, and then I'm just going to fill that with color. Next, I'm just going to duplicate that. I could draw the next shape, but I'm just going to duplicate it and save time. And just rotate it about 45 degrees like that. And you can just make it bigger. Make sure you select uniform option and make sure it's perfectly centered. So feel free to play with this tool, it's super fun to play with. We're all gonna end up with different looking patterns, but that's totally okay. Now what you want to do is merge these two layers together and make sure you deactivate the drawing assist. And here, which is the fun part, we're going to grab the liquify tool and select the second option, tool right or left, whatever you prefer. And we're just gonna give it a go and tap on the canvas, and you can see what it's doing. You might have to increase the size of your brush. So here guys, this is totally up to you how far you want to take it, how big you want to make it. I will let you have fun with this one and play with it. I'm quite happy with this one, to be honest. I think it does look like a peppermint candy, so I'm just going to select that layer and click copy. Go back to my artwork and select the inside shape, and I'm just going to click action, add and paste. And that's going to paste your super cool swirl into your artwork. And here you want to make sure it's a clipping mask, so make sure you create clipping mask. Just going to reposition it somewhere around here. I want it to kind of make it resemble the inside of the pea, so something like that. Now I want to give it a bit more realism once again, so I'm going to add a little bit of a shadow around here. So I'm creating a clipping mask above that swirl. Change the blending mode to multiply, and I'm going to use the dark green. So just like if this was casting a shadow, it would have the color of the object, so I'm using the dark green. And I'm going to use my shading brush and just gently add a bit of a shadow, making my brush smaller as I go closer to the edge, so I can really focus on this little corner here. I add a little bit of shadow just in here as well. It's very subtle, but it will make a difference at the end. Hopefully you guys can see. I think this shape in the background is a little bit flat, so I'm going to create a new layer just above that inside shape. And I'm going to change the blending mode to add this time, just to add a little bit of light in the center, almost like if there was light coming from the inside of that letter form. And I'm going to grab the light cream color and just add a gentle highlight. Totally optional, feel free to really play around here, there's no right or wrong. You're more than welcome to decorate it however you want. Talking about decoration, I'm going to add something on that dimensional effect. So I'm going to create a new layer for that dimensional effect, kind of just above all of the highlights and the shadows. So you guys remember we had the dimension, the shadow highlight with the light green and the highlight with the cream color. So I'm going to create a new layer just above that and make it a clipping mask, but this time I'm going to use the dotted line brush with the dark green, and I'm just gonna go on the edges like that. I'm gonna change the blending mode to multiply so it blends in a bit more, and I'm just literally creating a little decoration on the letter form. So trying to follow the shape. Don't worry too much if it's not perfect, we can fix that. I can see that there's a few places where it doesn't look super realistic, like it doesn't look three-dimensional. So what we can do is just grab the liquify tool, set to push this time, might lower the size a little bit. And here you can just move it a bit so it wraps around a little bit more. Something like that. So it looks a little bit more real. And if you haven't like really drawn your shape in the center, that's where you can readjust and kind of move it if needed. So that's a very useful tool. I love the liquify tool, like I use it all the time. And here I think I just need to simply erase this part because it doesn't look real at all. Make that a bit smaller. Doesn't have to be perfect, but here you might want to just take your time and make it as best as you can. Right, there's one more thing we need to add texture to. I think it needs a bit of a grainy effect on that template that I've given you. So let's select that template layer. Here I'm not going to add any shadows or highlights. I'm just going to try and give it a bit of grain. So I'm going to create a new layer, make it a clipping mask. And I'm going to grab the dark green. Use the shading brush. I'm going to lower the opacity a bit, so I'm just going to very gently add a bit of a grainy effect. I hope you guys can see that, but it's very subtle, but it just adds a bit of texture to it. And I'm going to do the same with that light cream color and kind of focus on this area here, just like if the light was coming from here. Again, it's extremely subtle. It's almost invisible on camera, but it is there, I promise. A little bit here as well, just to give a bit of texture. Okay, I think it needs a little bit more decoration. It's a little bit sad, so what we can do is add some little pearls. And to make a pearl, it's so simple. You only just need 3 layers. So the shape, your pearl, and a layer for shadows and a layer for highlights, and then you can create a cast shadow underneath. So 4 layers. So I'm going to create a new layer on top of everything else, and I'm going to grab my vector pen brush. I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see. I'm just going to draw with that pink shade from the color palette. Create a circle, so you're just drawing, holding, and then tap with one finger, so it's a perfect circle. Fill it with color, reposition it if needed. I'm going to create a clipping mask above that shape. Change the blending mode to multiply. Still using the dark pink. This time I'm going to grab the shading brush and create like a shadow on one side. Something like that. It is a little bit too bright, I think, so maybe I can add a little bit of that dark green, like that. It's so much better. It's very subtle, but it just creates like a very cool pearl effect. So now we have a shadow, we can create a new clipping mask and change the blending mode to add this time, so we can add a highlight. So I'm going to grab the pink again, or maybe the light pink, let's see. It's quite nice. Okay, yeah, I'm happy with that. And that's just as simple as that. So literally 2 layers, 1 shadow, 1 highlight. And now we can create a 4th layer just to create the cast shadow. So I'm going to create a new layer under that pearl. Change the blending mode to multiply. Still using the shading brush and dark green this time. I'm just going to draw like a cast shadow, and you can see I'm like trying to go on an angle, literally just trying to make it as realistic as possible, I guess. And when you zoom out, it looks like you've created a pearl, which is really cool. So let's group all of those 4 layers together. So we have the pearl, we have the shadow, the highlight, and the cast shadow. So I'm going to group that, and you can rename this group pearl. And then I just need to duplicate it twice, so I can use it here and probably here as well. Let's duplicate it. Easy. And one last time. There you go. So at this stage, there is another thing I like to add. If you've done any of my classes before, you know what I'm talking about. It's the little highlight on the corners. This time I'm only going to be adding it on the right hand side, just where the light is coming from. I would add it on this angle here and not here. So I'll demonstrate. I will create a new layer above absolutely everything else. Change the blending mode to add. And I'm going to grab that light cream color again. And this time I will be using the highlight pen. And I'm going to try and focus on just the right hand side of my shape, just to make it look like there is a light coming this way. So feel free to play around with that. There is no right or wrong, but I'll always recommend making this very subtle, because otherwise it just looks very strange. Might add a little bit of a highlight over there. So I'll make sure to share a high quality photo of my final artwork so you guys can look at how I've done it from up close, because I know sometimes it's hard to see on camera. You can also add a highlight on the pearl. I think it will add even more realism to the pearl. Great, so once you're happy with your highlights, I think what we can do is add a bit of texture to the background as well, just to give it a little bit more life, I suppose. What I'm going to do is create a new layer just above that colored layer that we have. So I should actually rename that and call that background. And I'm going to create a new layer on top of that. And I'm going to grab the light green using the shading brush. I'm really going to lower the opacity and make it quite big. And I'm just going to try and lighten up this area just here, like where, just around the letter form, just to brighten up the artwork a bit. And give it a bit of texture. It will probably be hard to see on camera, but feel free to do what you think looks best. Again, there is no right or wrong. I'm going to add a bit of shadow as well over there, just like if it was like a real picture of a 3D object. So I'm creating a new layer, changing the blending mode to multiply. Again, I'm just above that highlight effect. And this time I'm using the dark green. And I'm just going to focus on the corner over there. Something like that. Here guys, you're more than welcome to play with it as much as you want. I want to add a little bit of sparkles, so I'm going to create a new layer above everything else, change the blending mode to add, and I'm going to play with the fairy dust brush that is part of the Christmas toolkit. I'm just going to be using the cream color. Feel free to play with colors here guys. You might even want to play with the pink, see how that looks. Really love this brush because it really adds some nice fairy dust. You only just need like one tap and it's creating some very cool sparkles. Perfect for Christmas. Feel free to play around with that. Again, there's no right or wrong. You can add as much or as little as you want. I know I've also added some snowflakes, so feel free to choose whatever you want here. I think I added this one over here, so the snowflake one. And here you can just add as many snowflakes as you want to make it more realistic. You can make it different sizes, different opacities. That's pretty much it. I know there is one last thing I did, and that is to actually use that last color from the color palette and use that to give a bit of warmth to the artwork. Even though it's Christmas and we've done snow, I think I like to add a little bit of warmth. I actually just created a new layer and filled the entire layer with that bright orange. Trust the process, guys. And here I changed the blending mode to linear burn. And you can see it's creating some very, very interesting effects here. So I really encourage you guys to play around with different blending modes, see what works best for you. I know I love the linear burn. I think I just added about 15%, not much, but it does create a bit of a different look. It's a bit hard to see on camera, but it really creates a different color effect and I really love that. Okay, I think I'm done here. I'm just going to add a bit of chromatic aberration and noise. You guys are more than welcome to do that as well. but make sure you duplicate your artwork before you actually flatten it. So this is my duplicate. I'm going to group all of my layers together. You want to make sure you erase any layer that is hidden and not visible. Then I'm going to tap on that group and click flatten. Going into my adjustments, noise, about 5%, chromatic aberration, about 5% as well. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and I hope it was helpful to you and that you stick around and watch more of my YouTube videos. Now I want to encourage you to try a different letter form or maybe try out an entire word for your lettering, and that could be an idea for a gift for a friend this Christmas. And if you try out this tutorial, please make sure to tag me so I can see your work. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas and I'll see you guys in my next video.